Dragon Age Inquisition was rated M for mature by the ESRB and contains blood, intense violence, nudity, sexual content, and strong language. Viewer discretion is advised. Hello everyone, my name is Amaronith and I play games for the internet, and today we're playing Dragon Age Inquisition. It's time for another Codex reading, and let's just get right into it, starting with characters. Magister Erimond. My dearest Demetrius, I hope this letter finds you recovered from those ghastly meetings about road repair or import taxes or whatever terribly important work has consumed your time. I applaud your patriotic efforts to maintain the Imperium's infrastructure, while the horned beasts to the north wage bloody war against us. I have asked before, but you are my closest friend, and now that you have seen the stirrings of our work, I hoped you might reconsider. You cannot think your talents adequately spent on road work, Mitri. You come from the blood of the Dreamers. My master will restore the Imperium to a greatness it has not seen since our ancestors walked in the Golden City. He will rule not just a nation, but the world. Those who show loyalty now stand to reap the benefits when all the world kneels to the Venatori. Perhaps you are more comfortable with roads. When my master returns to Winter to the glory it deserves, he will be pleased to find the nation well paved. Consider well, my friend. Magister Erimond of Virantium. What a fucking tool. Ugh, gross. Professor Frederic of Serault. Anton. If anyone alive can answer your questions about the social habits of the greater Vimarch Wyvern, it is Frederic of Serault, professor of Draconology at the University of Orlais. I have met him a few times, and he is exceedingly knowledgeable about his field of study, although less knowledgeable about his current state of dress, the day of the week, and the location of his quill and ink, but nonetheless quite brilliant. Cordially, Magister Zalderion Antonidas. Creatures. Bruiser. Researched. A warrior wielding a great blade strikes terror into common soldiers, but to a chevalier he is no greater danger than any other opponent. A skilled warrior is struck down by a maul or a battle-axe in one of three cases. In the first, he is taken unawares in the heat of battle. In the second, he cannot evade the blow because of the nature of the battlefield, or his own injuries. And in the third and most common case, he is struck down because he reacts poorly. We do not train enough against two-handed weapons because we disdain them ourselves. I think this is a mistake, and in time to come, I hope it is corrected. I have seen too many skilled warriors die because they see a great maul coming down at them and raise a shield to block instead of deflect. I have seen men lose their composure due to fear or anger and engage such a warrior directly, thinking they can risk a blow to their body as they would from a light sword or a dagger. In the heat of battle, even the trained mind will think such things. Those who cannot overcome such thoughts die. You must watch the weapon, but only to gauge its length. Otherwise, as in all fights, the opponent's hips and shoulders will tell his intent. The great weapons are dangerous only when moving or poised overhead to strike down. You must give ground, but only against the true threat. If he advances but is not truly prepared to strike, you must rush in, cut him, and withdraw to your guard before his blow is ready. It may take 10 cuts to kill him. Even after the 9th, he may cleave your head from your body if you do not respect the distance he can cover. If using such a weapon yourself, mark your distance and do not allow yourself to react to an opponent outside your reach. You cannot recover your guard as quickly as you can with a sword and shield. Keep your weapon moving and measure your blows. A stuttered step on your strike can fool many opponents into thinking you are out of range, then rushing their defense. In this manner you may kill most who stand against you. Fighting in such a manner you may feel more like a butcher than a hero, but the living may console themselves while the dead cannot. An excerpt from A Meditation upon the Use of Blades by Sword Master Massage de Jean-Mien. Required reading at the Académie des Chevaliers. Researched, damage against humanoids increased. Dragon. Researched. A fully mature adult female dragon is a high dragon, the great monster of legend, the rarest of all dragon kind. These dragons hollow out massive layers for themselves, for they need the space to house their harem of drakes as well as their eggs and dragonlings. High dragons are seldom seen. They spend most of their time sleeping and mating, living off prey their drakes bring back. But once every 100 years or so, the high dragon prepares for clutching by emerging from her lair and taking wing. She will fly far and wide, eating hundreds of animals, most often livestock, over the course of a few weeks, leaving smoldering devastation in her wake. She then returns to her lair to lay her eggs and will not again appear in the skies for another century. Researched, damage against dragons increased. Fennec. Researched. My dearest and best father and lord, you are strong and fair and obviously the most handsome Arl in all of Ferelden. I want a Fennec. Please, please, please get one for me. I saw a picture in a book that Bridget was carrying for Master Fergal, and it's the fluffiest and most delightful creature I have ever seen. The book says that they live in the mountains and eat voles and repulsive things like that. When I get mine, I will feed it only nice things, like cake and pearls. Please, please, please send someone to catch one. I really need one right now. Ruby wants company. It's not my fault that Permian Bubble broke. Don't believe anything Eileen says. Please, I promise I will spend no more gold on silks this month. It's too cold anyway. Your most loving and obedient daughter, Habron. A note from Habron Brylan to her father Leoninus Brylan, Earl of Southreach, written in 931 Dragon. Reports indicate that Habron did receive a white fox as a gift from her father later that month. She promptly lost it down a well. Researched, damage against beasts increased. Phoenix. Orlesians believe the phoenix to be a herald of woe, perhaps because the creatures frequent inhospitable places where sane travelers fear to tread. It may also be because they belch a sort of sulphurous gas that reeks of rotten eggs and ancient peat bog, and flocks of the beast have a pervasive odor of death about them. Orlesians are not always so metaphorical as they like us to believe. From In Pursuit of Knowledge, Travels of a Chantry Scholar by Brother Genetivi. Quillback. Those men of learning who claim dominion over the cold, weirdly angled laws of this world would deny that unutterable savagery of nature, conjuring their knowledge as a man in repose draws a blanket over himself, somnolent, to distract from the cognizant mind the lethargic calignosity of this world. Such is the mendacity made manifest in the Quillback. Its hooked beak describes a smile that makes a mock of the laws of man and maker, and in the sagging folds of its rough and squamous hide lies no elegant simplicity, but look upon its dorsal ridge for the proof, if logic be your refuge, for in the ebon spines that jut uncaringly from its back, no man of learning can fail to see the cold and twisted spires of the Black City itself. What maker would give mock to our ebullient transgressions by marking his domicile in the flesh of this repugnant eater of flesh, this scavenger of wastes and deserts? What message can any man read in this carrion feeder's decrepit spines, that the golden city of which we dream is black, always black, the swollen infection poisoned from time beyond the knowledge of our insignificant minds, awaiting only our unheeding touch to afflict us with understanding of our true place in the vast, uncaring world. From An Anatomy of Various Terrible Beasts by Baron Havard Pierre d'Armortessan. Master means that it's pointy. Footnote in the margins of the manuscript by the Baron Scribe. Footnote in the margins of the manuscript by the Baron Scribe Dunwich. Thank you, Dunwich. The good Baron is a fucking tool, God. remember if I've read this. So... Varghest. The Varghest is now known to be a distant relative of wyverns and dragons, but in ancient times it was believed to be a spirit manifest in the world. Syrian legend says that the Varghest hunts those who have committed great wrongs against their own kin, and when the creature finds its quarry, it drags the guilty party to the gods for judgment. This is perhaps due to the beast's hunting habits. Varghest prefer to bring their prey still living. This is perhaps due to the beast's hunting habits. Varghest prefer to bring prey still living to their nests to feed their young. From A Study of the Southern Draconids by From A Study of the Southern Draconids by Frederic of Serault, published by the University of Orlais. History. Old Chantry trail signs. The Chantry used these symbols long ago to mark trails to hidden locations. They are often mistaken by passers-by as simple carvings in the rocks and trees. Ritual Tower. Many Tevinter structures litter the wastelands of southwestern Orlais. In the age before the First Blight, the Imperium expanded through the south at an incredible rate, and the lands farthest from Minrathous became home to a great many sites dedicated to magical experimentation, taking advantage of natural weaknesses in the Vale, as well as the distance from the Archon's oversight, to try ever more dangerous fields of study. As with Eonar in the Ferelden, the laboratories of Orlais were set upon by the followers of Andraste during the uprising, and little remains of them now, save crumbled stone. An excerpt from Empire and Imperium by Sister Petrine, Chantry scholar. The Mason's Tales. Sacrifice. From what I can figure, this one is called Sacrifice. I'll get back to that later. By two sculptors, and I'll get back to that sooner. The sculptor's gone to the trouble of faces. I'd guess she worked from portraits, which means there were people who considered themselves important enough to need them. The scene is a classic example of don't do this, because the sculptor hates them. It's in the way it's carved, all fast, hard edges, uglier than they need to be, even for your average Tevinter who, and this isn't just me, mind, stands like a lanky vein of lyrium. But don't mistake that for sloppy carving. It's natural, practiced. The carver knows Tevinter. Bet she is one, and it's self-hate, probably. And obvious enough, there's skulls all over, and too big and horned. That brings to mind your Canary, and fair enough, right? Tevinters hate Canary, and have ever since they showed up. No Magister wants his mouth contracted. No Magister wants his mouth contradicted, let alone stitched. So it makes sense they're there, even that early, I suppose. Because this is probably that business of readying to invade the Fade, and giants with horns are a good motivator to sodding hurry up. Odd thing, though, is that those two are not the only Canary in the carving. The one in the middle was sculpted with horns, and someone has gone in later and chipped them off. You can tell by the surface of it. Well, maybe you can't, but I can. Seen it happen time and again. Tastes change, and the ancestors' nudes are suddenly embarrassing. So in comes a new hand to paint on some clothes, and here, judging by the marks, to cut away any horns and make the victim look human. Some proud new owner didn't want to throw out the antiquity, but also didn't want people to think grandmamas sliced up a Canary. Looks like they didn't care if she kept their heads around, though. So, the carvers both wanted to show Tevinter being shits, but the later one didn't want to show what about. And that's usually to avoid blame or deny credit. Or to be an arse, I suppose. The Secret Tongue of Slaves. Despite widespread illiteracy, Tevinter's slaves have developed a series of small pictograms that they scrawl on walls or under furniture, hidden from their uncaring owners. Regional variations make deciphering them a unique challenge. In one city, the sign of a clenched fist means a murderous master. In another, the same symbol indicates a harsh slave owner, but not one with a fatal temper. The ruling class's general indifference to the moods and fears of their slaves make this pictorial argot an important method of communication. It is therefore all the more strange so many Tevinter comedies center around farcical misunderstanding of a sloppily written sigil, where witty slaves scramble to subvert blame in time to avoid beheading. Perhaps it comforts Tevinters well-to-do to believe that their property is only this clever and human in fiction. From a lesson book by Besha of Ravane. Places. Adamant Fortress. Of all the decisions we Grey Wardens were forced to make over the lean years, withdrawing from the Fortress of Adamant was perhaps the most difficult. It had been built as a bastion against darkspawn spilling out from the abyssal rift, a symbol of how we had done the impossible, pushing those creatures back into the shadows where they belonged. We kept the land safe from further encroachment, but as each new age dawned, memories of our sacrifice became fainter. The entire western approach had become a wasteland, and thus the expense of maintaining the fortress became increasingly difficult to justify. There were no griffins to fill its weirs, too few wardens to man its battlements, too many good men and women killed by demons creeping through the thinning veil. Each visit of the warden commander made it more apparent that Adamant had become a symbol of our decline. Even if darkspawn still emerged from the chasm, who would they threaten other than the wardens themselves? So in the dawn of the Blessed Age, we sealed the fortress's mighty gates. We left the great griffin statues to tarnish in the blowing sand, retreating to Montsemard with a sense of loss and shame. I returned recently with a small expedition to retrieve supplies, surprised to see it still standing. The dwarves did well by us. I suspect Adamant will remain for ages to come. But should the Order ever return, they will find it difficult to resurrect. Only spirits roam its halls now, alongside the memory of those who gave their lives to protect us all from darkness. From the Journal of Veldin, Grey Warden of Orlais, 858 Blessed. Coracavus. On the edge of the Empire they erected a prison, Coracavus, the Dark Pit. Far removed from the cultural heart of the Imperium, Coracavus held and meted out punishment to local peoples who denied Tevinter's claims to the region and to so-called loyal citizens who believed living on the fringes of civilization would grant them immunity from the Imperium's laws. In a few cases, political prisoners who could not be sentenced with execution were sent to Coracavus instead. It was widely known that bribes brought nothing there, and having the right name would not be rewarded with leniency. It is said that upon hearing their judgments, these individuals begged for death. From A Brief History of the Imperium, Volume 3, by Tyrus Altim. The Still Ruins. 24 Harvest Mere. A pair of hunters arrived today from the western approach. They carried a third between them, unconscious. The hunters found the man wandering the approach. He collapsed at their feet before they could learn his identity. The rough stories you hear, I'm surprised they didn't slit his throat and call it mercy. Instead, they lay him alongside their prizes and took him from that place. Cerise forced him to swallow water with a mixture of herbs. Elaine says he will show me how to make it tomorrow. 26 Harvest Mere. Cerise and Elaine left the patient to my care. They believe the man will die, so what harm could I do? Still, I prepare the herbs with care. I do what I can to make him comfortable. The man murmurs in his sleep, something about there being no wind. I would open the window, but the air is chill, and I fear it would weaken him. 5 First Fall. My patient opened his eyes. Varghest took the rest. Then I found it. Everything so still. There was no wind. He seemed quite intent. In the western approach? I asked. Oh, a soldier. This last about the figurine I had placed on his bedside table for Saturnalia. Foolish, but I thought it might cheer him. 8 First Fall. My patient took a simple meal. Speaking wearies him, but he tried. Everything was so still. There was no wind. I told him that sounded peaceful. His eyes widened in fear. The demons were still there. I tried to comfort him, but he was desperate to explain the disturbing images in his mind. Later I saw him staring at the little soldier. They couldn't move, he murmured. I said I could take the toy away, but he shook his head. 21st Fall. Cerise and Elaine declared my patient well enough to travel. He left before I returned from visiting my sister. I suspect his still ruins were a delusion brought on by his trials in the approach, but I will never know. I wish I could have said goodbye. Cerise says he took the soldier with him. Perhaps it was a comfort after all. From the Journal of Nicolid Envers, Healer's Apprentice. The Western Approach. Once these wastes were a land of plenty. Can you believe it? The rain came north over the Gomordan peaks, turning the plains green and verdant for 3 months of the year. 800 years ago that changed. During the second blight, darkspawn spilled out of an enormous crack in the earth, corrupting it with their foul blood, and it never recovered, even after they were driven back underground. The Grey Wardens built Adamant Fortress to stand watch over that chasm, but eventually even they abandoned it to the wind and the biting sand. What few of us could eke out a living in this maker-forsaken place do so knowing that any number of deaths await us. Darkspawn raids, dragons, bandits, not to mention starvation from the lack of water and game. If we stay, it is because we know there are treasures buried in the bones of this place, ruins from the time when Tevinter ruled, and even earlier. We pass tales around our campfires of the things we have seen, shrouded in the dust storms. My favorites are the ones about relics that could restore the Western Approach once more, but I don't believe them. Truth be told, on nights when the wind is calm, I can stand on a hilltop and see for miles in the moonlight over a stark beauty of which no other Orlesian can claim to know the equal. On those nights, I hope it will never change. From Lands of the Abyss, by Magistrate Gilles de Saint-Christ. Resources found here: elfroot, spindleweed, blood lotus, dragonthorn, witherstock, deathroot, deep mushroom, ghoul's beard, serpentstone, lazurite, paragon's luster, everite. Tales. A missing slave. In Tevinter, a slave is invisible, even though the entire empire rests on our backs. Our hands built the walls of Minrathous and carry its wealth along the crumbling roads. Scribes like myself take diction and write letters that shift the balance of power. My daughter, Leonora, a kitchen slave, works night and day so Magister Delphine isn't troubled by a torn robe or a cold supper. Normally I meet Leonora about the kitchens, but it has been days since our paths crossed. No one has seen her. I can't help but think of the old stories that cross the slave markets like lightning, how, centuries ago, the ancients built their cities with blood magic, raising the very towers and walls with terrible rituals, using our lives as fuel. Thousands of slaves were sacrificed as we were forced onto altars of the old gods. Magister Delphine's perfect, marble-faced mansion likely stands on the back of 100 voiceless elves. But that was a different time. Andraste's words against blood magic made the practice all but forbidden and shunned. Though we may be punished, few slaves are dragged to the altar or milked of blood without at least some reprimand. Yet Leonora is missing, and Magister Delphine seems different. She carries an aura she never had before, and rumors fly that a bitter rival has been publicly humiliated in a duel of magic. Through my grief, I know that my Leonora's life was the price. I ache to speak as an equal with Magister Delphine, to demand answers, but such an audience would be a joke to her. No one sees a slave. Written in secret by slave scribe Solvarin Bran, 865 blessed. Bottles of Thedas. Chastened sackmead, a brutishly strong honey liqueur reminiscent of warm summer days, apple blossoms on the wind, with an unexpected aftertaste of father going off to war, never to return. Bitter, to say the least. Garbolg's backcountry reserve. Likely dropped to avoid seizure by authorities, or because of seizure due to drinking it. Garbolg only brewed from 874 to 892 blessed, killed when the vapors in his beard spontaneously combusted. Golden Scythe 490 black. This battlefield spirit maintains a chill even in direct sunlight, which it appears to absorb. Optimal serving is by the drop. Contact with exposed flesh is discouraged, but likely inevitable. Legacy White Sheer. Peculiar and rare, a single run of this spirit took color and what has been optimistically called flavor from lyrium in the cask's bilge hoop. A sipping whiskey if you value your innards. Circa 790 TE. Sun Blonde Vint 1. Tevinter brewed for a very discreet clientele, and strong enough to fluster a tranquil. An almost weightless spirit, best served with a powdering of catsbane as a flavor enhancer and antidote. Aqua Magus. Fine spirits infused with a bit of refined lyrium, potentially fatal if ingested in quantity. Dragon Piss. The name is probably figurative, but no one knows for sure. Hirol's Lava Burst. It tastes like burning. Brewed exclusively in Cal Hirol. McKay's Epic Single Malt. This whiskey is older than the maker and smoother than elven baby butt. West Hill Brandy. Notes of blackcurrant with a honeysuckle finish. Also, tastes like brandy. Flames of Our Lady. A wine with hues that range from blood to fire, always in that order. In the south, take a single draught, shout, "She is with us," and throw the remainder into a fireplace. In the north, draw steel and march. Silent Plains Piquette. An artisanal treatment of a Tevinter slave wine. Grape pomace is soaked and pressed, then buried for a year under the wastes where the first archdemon fell. One assumes. They keep finding the stuff. Finale by Masad. The last bottling of the legendary vintners of Ferelden before lands were divided. Tears on the glass as slow as the turning of a reluctant air, as quick on the tongue as words that can't be unsaid. Butterbile 784. A hard liquor that is not so much served as it is brandished. Coarse and indifferent, it is to your taste, or it is not. The failing is yours if you cannot raise, or lower, to the challenge of a distiller told not to. Vint 9 Rowan's Rose. Delicate to the nose, comfort to the tongue, and strangely, a half-remembered whisper to the ears. It is described as, and inspires, a wistful spirit, a vintner's opus. Absence. I am aware of how to spell it. This bottling reflects my wish that the current crop of behatted, self-styled cads would disappear. I prefer la fille verte as spirit, not affectation. Distiller Emeritus Gaivon. Antivan Sip Sip. Careful, this one's mean. Attic raised mean. Popular among highborn who wish to seem dangerous, but more at home grasped by the neck by those who actually are. Carnal 869 Blessed. An Orlesian liqueur for the daring, or those who wish to seem so. Said to enhance sensation, and at the bottom, an erotically carved peach pit. The design is plain, but the bottler assures that the act of carving was scandalous. Abyssal Peach, not so much filtered as dredged, should be kept in a cold, dark place, also locked. Forgotten as well, if one is wise. Alvarado's Bathtub Boot Screech. If you can read this, you haven't drunk it. Constellation Fenrir. Called White Wolf in common parlance, Fenrir has always been considered an oddity among scholars, primarily because wolves have no special place within ancient Tevinter folklore. To many, this represents the strongest argument that the Imperium deliberately supplanted older elven constellation names. In the case of Fenrir, an alignment with the elven trickster god Fenrir would be logical. Others claim a much older Nerimanian tale of a wolf escaping hunters by fleeing into the sky exists, but the legend's veracity has never been proven. From A Study of Theodosian Astronomy by Sister Orin Petrarchius. Constellation Toth. The only constellation to maintain its ancient name in the present day, the constellation Toth directly corresponds to the ancient Tevinter old god known as Toth, the Dragon of Fire. The depiction of this constellation varies, usually represented either as a man of flame, in agony, presumably a victim of the old god, or as a flaming orb. Scholars in the Divine Age attempted to officially change the nomenclature to Ignifir. This is why some old text recorded as such, but the attempt never caught on, even after the eradication of old god worship in the Imperium. From A Study of Theodosian Astronomy by Sister Orin Petrarchius. Grey Whiskey, Ritewine, Conscription Ale. Perhaps local to a handful of Grey Warden companies, these spirits reflect a custom, or legend, born of utility. Allowed to seize goods to aid their cause, wardens combine half-full bottles to save space while traveling. Never fully emptied, or, as with a kettle, cleaned, each eventually takes on a base flavor as unique as the warden carrying it. What do we care? Nothing burns like the first cup. Could be fact, could be tribute. It does seem as though the bottles range farther than the namesake warden could. A bottle marked Vintage, Warden Cornec. Notes of fruit and anger. A bottle marked Vintage, Warden Gibbons. Don't friggin' touch. I spit in this. I mean it. A bottle marked Vintage, Warden Tontiv. Home. A bottle marked Vintage, Warden Riordan. Serve yourself. A bottle marked Vintage, Warden Daedalem. Extra red. A bottle marked Vintage, Warden Jarn. Smash when dead. A bottle marked Vintage, Warden Evalal. Griffin Wing Ale. A bottle marked Vintage, Warden Bethany Hawk. Princess Piss. Our Lady of the Anderfels, a land filled with wonders like the Merdane, with its gigantic white statue of Our Lady carved into its face, her hands outstretched and bearing an eternal flame. Genitivi's words, brief as they were, inspired me. This stone prophet sounded magnificent. I had to see her for myself. I trekked up the Imperial Highway, concealing my identity and taking care not to seem like a foreigner. At Valdorma, a neglected road led west. Soon the dry land gave way to absolute desolation. Red earth, bones, blowing sand stripped my face raw. When it cleared, I could see for miles. Not that there was anything to see. The few settlements I encountered were populated with derelicts and Chantry zealots. They warned me of worse trials should I continue to the Merdane. Eventually I turned back, opting for a smaller statue, in a place the maker hadn't abandoned. Brother Berard, Perendale Chantry Cleric. Responsible blood magic. Let me correct you, apprentice. While it is true that blood magic is woven through the history of Tevinter, there are good reasons, quite aside from the Chantry's sermons, that such arts are now frowned upon. Consider the ancient magisters who once attempted to map the fate itself. A worthy goal, perhaps, but a costly one. When their spells exhausted their lyrium supply, the magister spilled the blood of countless slaves. To what end? The shifting nature of the fade made the effort futile, and so much death left the magisters open to possessions by demons. Wasteful! Some still idolize Terena of the Rock, who used blood magic against the Canary during the Steel Age. They say she cut her flesh on the shore of Marnus Pell as the dreadnoughts sailed in, turned her spells against their crews, and boiled the very blood in their veins. A terrifying display, to be sure, but against Canary? It only made them more determined when they besieged the ports of Carastus. And what of Magister Calanthus, that fool who believed he could make himself the Ascended Man with blood magic? 33 slaves died in that rite, and Calanthus became an abomination so horrific that his apprentices tore out their eyes at the sight of him. You quote the example of the lovers Crescens and Seraphinian. Yes, Seraphinian offered his own blood to cure Crescens of her wasting disease, and Crescens lived a long life. But if the noblest use of blood magic still calls for the death of a good man, is that not enough reason to reconsider? Letter from Magister Esthea to her apprentice, 771 Storm. And that is that. Next time we'll continue with going through the Western approach. In the meantime, take care of yourselves, be safe, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.